My face bears a large scar, a mark left by the fire that took my mother. My entire life I've been shunned by others, abandoned by my adoptive parents. But I never expected that 25 years later, when fate brought me back to the place where that house burned to the ground, I would meet a man, a powerful billionaire. And just a few days later I discovered he was my biological father. Hello, my name is Andrew Moore. I'm 27 years old, working in a stifling room on the 17th floor of Langford Holdings, a major financial corporation where numbers and charts are my only companions. I'm not the type to talk about myself, but if you're here listening to this story, then perhaps I should start at the point where everything became clearest: the scar on my face. It stretches from my left cheek down to my neck. A rough, dark red line, as if someone had drawn on my skin with a fiery pen. It's not just a mark on my body, it's the story of my life, a reminder of what I've lost and what I've tried to escape. I don't like looking in the mirror. Every time I catch my reflection, on the office's glass doors, in the elevator, or even on my phone screen, I turn away. That scar doesn't just make me different, it makes me feel like I don't belong anywhere. I often wear a mask, pull my collar up high, or simply bow my head when passing through a crowd. But no matter how I hide, people's eyes always find me. They stare, curious, pitying, or worse, disgusted. And I've learned to live with it the way you learn to live with chronic pain. Today I'm sitting in a meeting room at the company, a brightly lit space with glass walls and a polished wooden table. We're discussing the latest quarterly financial report, the dry numbers I've spent countless nights analyzing. I don't like these meetings, not because of the work, but because of the eyes. I feel them, even when I'm scribbling notes with my head down, pretending not to notice. The stolen glances, the whispers behind my back. I'm used to it, but that doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. He looks like he just walked out of a horror movie. A small but sharp voice cuts through from the corner of the room, right after the boss steps out to take a call. I don't look up, but my hand freezes, the pen pausing mid-page. A ripple of stifled laughter spreads like a small wave, enough to make my heart clench. I know it's James, the salesman, who always flashes a friendly smile to your face but is ready to stab you in the back. I don't respond. I never do. But in my mind, old memories flood back, like a film played in reverse, pulling me back to the days when this scar wasn't just a wound on my skin, but a pain that shaped who I am. When I was 4 years old, my mother's house was engulfed in flames. I don't remember much, but the fragments of memory are terrifyingly vivid. I remember the smell of smoke, acrid and thick, clawing at my nose like a beast. I remember my mother's screams, her voice breaking amid the explosions and the splintering of wood. I remember cowering in a corner, clutching a tattered teddy bear, tears streaming down my face as the fire licked the walls. And then, a figure appeared, tall and strong, cutting through the smoke. It was Henry Scott, a firefighter. He scooped me up, holding me tightly against his broad chest, and ran out of the collapsing house. I heard his labored breathing, felt his heart pounding against my ear, and then light. The blinding light of the sky outside, where I was set down on the cold grass. But my mother, she didn't make it out of that house. I don't know what she did or why she didn't follow. Maybe she was looking for me. Maybe she was trapped somewhere in the inferno. I don't know. All I know is that from that day on, I became an orphan, with a permanent burn scar on my face and an emptiness in my heart that nothing could fill. Henry Scott, the firefighter who saved me, became my adoptive father. He and his wife, Marla Scott, were childless at the time, unable to conceive. They took me in, but I soon realized their love wasn't what I'd dreamed a family would be. Henry was a stern man, his eyes always cold, as if he saw me as a burden rather than a child. Marla was harsher, her words like knives. Useless, she'd say when I broke a glass or messed up a task. The kid picked from the ashes. She called me as if I were a discarded object, worthless. Their house was cold, not for lack of warmth, but for lack of humanity. I grew up amid beatings, scoldings, and a terrifying silence when I tried to tell them about my nightmares. I was afraid of everything. Henry's heavy footsteps, Marla's piercing glares, and even my own face in the mirror. The scar wasn't just on my skin, it seeped into my soul, making me believe I was a mistake, something that shouldn't exist. School wasn't any better. The other kids looked at me like I was a monster. They whispered, pointed, and sometimes played cruel pranks. I remember one time after class, a group of older students surrounded me, laughing and calling me burn face. I stood there, fists clenched, holding back tears, wishing I could disappear. No one wanted to play with me, no one invited me to birthdays or sat with me at lunch. I became a silent shadow, always choosing the back corner of the classroom, always keeping my head down so no one could see my face. There was only one person who didn't look at me that way. Harper, Henry and Marla's biological daughter, 5 years younger than me. She was the only light in my dark world. Harper was never afraid of my scar. She'd hold my hand, smile brightly, and tell me innocent stories about cats or stars. When the neighborhood kids bullied me, Harper would stand in front of me, small but brave, shouting, "Leave him alone." I don't know why she cared for me, but to me, Harper was family. The only real family I ever had. At 18, I left the house of Henry and Marla, the adoptive parents who gave me a roof but never love. I still remember standing at the gate, clutching a worn-out backpack containing a few clothes, a pair of tattered shoes, and a scholarship acceptance letter from a university hundreds of miles away. Harper, my adoptive younger sister, stood there, her eyes red and teary, her small hands clinging to my shirt. "You'll be okay, right, Andrew?" she asked, her voice trembling. I nodded, forcing a smile, but inside a storm of fear and hope raged. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to leave this place, where every corner of the house, every glance from Henry and Marla reminded me I was the kid picked from the ashes. After 4 years of college, I graduated with honors. I didn't attend the graduation ceremony, didn't take photos in a cap and gown, and had no one to pat my shoulder in congratulations. I just wanted to leave, to start over, hoping work would give me a new purpose. I applied to Langford Holdings, a major financial corporation in Richmond, and to my surprise, they hired me. I moved into a small, run-down apartment with stained walls and the constant sound of car horns from the busy street below. It wasn't a dream home, but it was mine, a place where no one called me useless or the kid picked from the ashes. The job at Langford Holdings was a new challenge, but it was also another version of what I'd already been through. I sat in a small office surrounded by well-dressed, confident colleagues who always knew how to stand out. I was the opposite. I worked hard, double-checking every number, finishing reports ahead of schedule, but I never said much. I didn't join morning coffee chats, didn't joke around during lunch breaks, and didn't go drinking with the group after work. I knew what they said behind my back, about my scar, my quiet demeanor, the way I avoided cameras in group photos. "He's good, but weird," I overheard James say once as I passed by the break room. I wasn't surprised. It was the same whispers I'd heard at school, at coffee shops, anywhere I'd ever been. But some days the loneliness was so heavy it felt like I couldn't breathe. I remember that meeting when James and his colleagues snickered behind my back. I left the meeting room, stepped into the elevator, and felt like the whole world was pressing down on my shoulders. Back at my apartment, I sat in the dark, staring at the city lights twinkling through the window. I wondered what I was living for. Work? Money? Or just to prove I wasn't the useless thing Henry and Marla said I was? I had no answers. My relationship with my adoptive parents grew more distant. The rare times I visited were usually for Harper. She was now a nursing student, still as radiant as the only light in my dark world. Every time we met, Harper hugged me tightly, talking about the patients she cared for, her dreams, and asking me about everything from work to my daily meals. "You need to eat more, Andrew, you're getting thinner," she'd say, frowning, but her eyes sparkled with affection. I'd smile, feeling a rare warmth in my heart. But those visits were always overshadowed by Henry and Marla. Henry still looked at me with cold eyes as if I were an unpaid debt. Marla never missed a chance to remind me of their sacrifice, as if raising me was a burden I should be eternally grateful for. "If it weren't for us, you'd be in an orphanage," she'd say, her voice sharp as a blade. I didn't respond, just lowered my head, waiting for the moment I could leave. I knew they didn't love me, and I no longer hoped they would change. But every time I left that house, I felt smaller, as if I were still that 4-year-old boy, cowering in a corner waiting for someone to save me from the flames. Harper was the only one who kept me tethered to this world. She called regularly, sent texts to check on me, and sometimes showed up unannounced at my door with a box of homemade cookies. "You're my family, Andrew," she once said when I confessed that I sometimes felt like I didn't belong anywhere. "No matter what happens, you're my brother." Those words, simple but sincere, were the only thing that kept me from completely giving up. Then my life began to change during a rare business trip that took me away from the stifling office in Richmond. I drove through suburban roads where the trees thinned out and old weathered houses emerged, carrying the faint decay of time. I had no intention of stopping. There was no reason to, until an old faded sign came into view. George Street. The name hit me like a punch. I slammed on the brakes. The car jerked to a stop in the middle of the road, the blaring horns behind me ringing out. But I heard nothing. My heart pounded, my chest tightened. George Street, the place where my mother's house once stood, where the fire took her and left a permanent scar on my face. I don't know what made me turn onto that street. Maybe a vague intuition, or perhaps I was just tired of running. The narrow, bumpy road was lined with old houses, their paint peeling. I drove slowly, my eyes scanning each house number until I saw it, my mother's old house. It was still there like a ghost from the past, but now it was just a pile of ruins. Blackened walls, shattered windows, a collapsed roof. Weeds grew wildly around the rusted fence. I parked the car, turned off the engine, and sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel as if letting go would sweep me into a whirlwind of memories. I stepped out of the car, the cold wind tousling my hair. I pulled down my mask, exposing the scar, not out of courage, but because here, amidst these ruins, there was no one to judge me. I stood before the house, staring at the charred walls, and it felt like time had never passed. I saw myself, a 4-year-old boy, cowering in a corner, clutching a tattered teddy bear, acrid smoke burning my nose. I heard my mother's screams, her voice breaking amid the explosions and splintering wood. "Andrew, run!" she shouted, but I couldn't run. I could only cry until Henry, the firefighter, burst through the smoke, scooped me up, and carried me out of the inferno. But my mother, she never made it out of that house. I stepped closer, my feet crunching through the overgrown weeds. I touched the wall, my fingers tracing the remnants of blackened soot. It still smelled of smoke even after more than 20 years. I closed my eyes, trying to recall my mother's face. But all that came was a blurry image of a gentle woman with disheveled brown hair and a warm smile I never had the chance to etch into my memory. "Mom," I whispered, my voice lost in the wind. "I'm sorry." "It was a beautiful house once, wasn't it?" A deep voice startled me from behind. I spun around to see an older man, perhaps in his 50s, standing a few steps away. He wore an expensive suit, his silver hair neatly combed, but his eyes carried a profound sadness, as if he, too, was gazing into an unreachable past. I quickly pulled my mask back up, instinctively hiding the scar, but he didn't seem to notice or care. I'm sorry, I didn't see you," I mumbled, my voice awkward. "Did you know this house?" He nodded, his eyes still fixed on the ruins. "I knew the people who lived here a long time ago." His voice was low, carrying a weight I couldn't explain. "A very special woman." A chill ran down my spine. "Did you know my mother?" I asked, unable to hold back. "Her name was Evelyn Moore." The man froze, a flicker of shock crossing his eyes, but he quickly regained his composure. "Evelyn," he repeated, as if the name were a precious gem he'd kept hidden for years. "Yes, I knew her." He looked at me, Truly looked at me for the first time, and I felt his gaze pierce through the mask as if he were trying to read my story. "And you are?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm Andrew. I'm her son. I survived the fire that year." The air between us seemed to freeze. He stared at me for so long it made me uneasy. There was something indescribable in his eyes, surprise, guilt, and a hint of recognition, as if he saw something familiar in me. But he didn't say anything about it. Instead, he gave a faint, sad smile. "You survived. That's a miracle." I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to ask who he was, why he knew my mother, why he was standing here looking at this house with such sorrow. But something in his voice, in the way he stood silently amid the ruins, made me feel he carried a scar of his own. Invisible, but no less deep. "I'm Victor Waverly," he said, extending his hand. I shook it, feeling his grip strong but cold. I was just passing by, and memories pulled me back. We talked for a while, but not much. I shared a few vague memories of my mother, the fire, and how Henry saved me. He listened, nodded, but said little about himself. There was something strange, as if we were both holding back parts of our stories. As he prepared to leave, he turned back, looking straight at me. "Some houses burn down, but the memories inside them never fade," he said, his voice low like a prophecy. I stood there watching him walk away, his figure disappearing around the corner. His words echoed in my mind, like a puzzle I couldn't yet solve. I returned to my car, my heart in turmoil. I felt like I'd just met someone familiar, but I couldn't place where from. The burned house stood silent, as if guarding a secret I wasn't ready to face. About a week after my encounter with Victor, our company held its annual gala to celebrate the 30th anniversary of Langford Holdings, an event I had no desire to attend but couldn't avoid. I stood before the mirror in my apartment, adjusting my black dress shirt and tie, trying to make myself look as normal as possible. But when my eyes caught the scar in the reflection, I froze. It was still there, a shadow that never left me. I pulled my collar up high, put on my mask, and told myself I just had to endure a few hours before returning to my empty apartment. The hotel's grand ballroom was ablaze with chandelier light, the clinking of wine glasses mingling with lively conversations. My colleagues, dressed in expensive suits and evening gowns, moved through the room like actors on a stage. I stood in a corner near a window, trying to make myself invisible. But the scar, even partially hidden, still made me feel like an outsider. From behind me, James's laughter rang out. I didn't need to turn around to know who he was talking about. "Look, Andrew's hiding in the corner like a vampire," he said to a group of colleagues, his voice loud enough for me to hear. I lowered my head, pretending to study the glass of water in my hand, but my heart tightened. At that moment, the large doors of the ballroom swung open and an unexpected silence fell over the room. I looked up and my heart nearly stopped. Victor Waverly, the man I met on George Street, walked in, his presence commanding in a flawless black suit. But this wasn't the Victor from the desolate street. This was Victor Waverly, chairman and founder of Waverly Holdings, the parent company of Langford Holdings. I was stunned, gripping my glass so tightly it nearly shattered. He was my boss, the head of the conglomerate, someone I'd only heard about through speeches and company emails. But now, seeing him, I couldn't shake the memory of his sad eyes by the burned house, his cryptic words about memories that never fade. He moved through the crowd, his gaze sweeping the room, and I felt a jolt run down my spine when his eyes lingered on me longer than usual. Did he recognize me? Or was it just a coincidence? I lowered my head, trying to avoid his gaze, but my heart pounded as if it knew something I didn't. The party continued, but I couldn't focus. I stood alone, quietly observing the crowd. No one invited me to their table, no one struck up a conversation, and I didn't expect them to. But then, a sharp, familiar voice cut through my thoughts. "Hey you, why don't you take off that mask? I thought our company hired financial analysts, not horror movie actors." Laughter erupted from a nearby table, and I realized it was Noah Waverly, Victor's son, an arrogant young man with a smug smile. He stood up, sauntering toward me, his wine glass swaying in his hand. "What do you think? Want to audition for the lead in a ghost movie?" The people around laughed louder, as if it were the funniest joke they'd ever heard. I stood there, my fists clenched, nails digging into my palms. I wanted to scream, to tell him I wasn't a joke, that this scar was the remnant of a tragedy he'd never understand. But I said nothing. I never did. I just wanted to leave, to return to my apartment where no one could hurt me anymore. But then, another voice rang out, cold as ice and full of authority. "Enough, Noah." I looked up, and there was Victor Waverly standing in the middle of the ballroom, his eyes sharp as a blade. The room fell silent, the laughter dying instantly. Noah turned, his smug smile vanishing. "Father, look at him. His face is like a demon," he stammered. Victor strode forward, each step seeming to shake the floor. And then, before the entire ballroom, he raised his hand and slapped Noah hard across the face. The sound was sharp and piercing, leaving everyone stunned. My heart pounded, unable to believe what I was seeing. Victor glared at Noah, his voice clear, each word carved into the air. "The person you just insulted is my eldest son." The room went deathly quiet. I stood there, my mind reeling as if the floor had collapsed beneath me. Eldest son. What was he talking about? I looked at Victor, searching for an explanation in his eyes, but he only gazed at me, his expression filled with pain and resolve. Noah staggered back, his face red with anger and confusion. "Father, what are you saying?" he stammered, but Victor didn't answer. Instead, he turned to me, his voice softening but still commanding. "Andrew, come with me." He didn't wait for a response, just walked toward the door, and I, as if pulled by an invisible force, followed. I felt hundreds of eyes on me, whispers erupting in the room, but I couldn't make them out. My mind was a storm. Shock, confusion, and a single question. Who was Victor Waverly to me? We left the ballroom, leaving the chaos behind. I followed Victor down a long hallway, the dim lights casting shadows on his back. I wanted to stop, to ask why, to understand what was happening. But I couldn't. Part of me feared the answer, feared it would shatter everything I thought I knew about myself. We stepped outside into the cold Richmond night. Victor stopped, turned to face me, and for the first time I saw tears glistening in his eyes. "Andrew," he said, his voice trembling, "I owe you an explanation, but not here. Come with me, will you?" I nodded, not because I understood, but because I had no other choice. I climbed into his sleek black car, and as the door closed, I felt like I was stepping into a new chapter of my life. One I didn't know where it would lead, but one that would undoubtedly change everything. The car glided smoothly along the suburban roads of Richmond, the streetlights passing by like faint streaks of light reflected on the windows. I sat in the back seat, my hands gripping the edge of my jacket, trying to keep my breathing steady. Victor Waverly, the man I met by the burned house on George Street, the one who had just declared to an entire ballroom that I was his eldest son, was driving, his eyes occasionally flicking to the rearview mirror as if he wanted to say something but held back. I wanted to ask him, to scream for an explanation, but my chest tightened and the words caught in my throat. The scar on my face seemed to burn beneath the mask, as if reminding me that no matter how much I tried to escape the past, it always found a way to pull me back. Victor's words at the gala, "The person you just insulted is my eldest son," still echoed in my mind like a knife slicing through everything I thought I knew about myself. Eldest son. Me, Andrew. An orphan plucked from the ashes, raised in the cold indifference of adoptive parents, now the son of someone like Victor Waverly, the chairman of the city's largest financial conglomerate. It couldn't be possible. But the look in his eyes, filled with pain and resolve when he said those words, made it impossible to deny that something was happening. A secret I wasn't ready to face. The car stopped in front of a mansion nestled quietly in the suburbs, surrounded by tall oak trees and an ornate iron gate. The moonlight illuminated the house's facade, highlighting its classic yet cold architecture. Victor stepped out, opening the car door for me, and I hesitated before getting out, feeling as though I was stepping into a world that didn't belong to me. "Come inside, Andrew," he said, his voice gentle but heavy, as if he carried a burden I couldn't yet understand. We entered a spacious living room, the light from a crystal chandelier casting soft glows on the white walls and dark furniture. The air was fresh, but there was something stifling, as if the house itself held its own secrets. Victor gestured toward a leather armchair, and I sat down, my hands still clenched, my eyes avoiding his. He walked to a bar cart, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey, but when he offered one to me, I shook my head. "I don't drink," I said, my voice dry. "I just want you to explain. You said I'm your son. What does that mean?" Victor set the glass down and sat across from me, his hands clasped tightly together. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the floor as if searching for a way to piece together the fragments of a story he'd buried long ago. My heart pounded, each passing second stretching into eternity. Finally, he looked up, and I saw tears glistening in his eyes, a powerful man now looking more vulnerable than ever. "Andrew," he began, his voice trembling. "My real name is Victor Moore. Over 25 years ago, I fell in love with a woman named Evelyn Moore, your mother." I felt the floor drop out from beneath me. Evelyn Moore, my mother. The gentle woman from my hazy memories, the one who screamed for me to run from the fire, the one who never made it out of the burning house on George Street. I stared at Victor, searching for a sign that he was lying, but his eyes, filled with pain, sincerity, and guilt, made it impossible to doubt him. You loved my mother?" I asked, my voice breaking. Victor took a deep breath, as if summoning every ounce of courage to continue. "I didn't just love Evelyn," he said, each word pulled from a deep place within him. "I married her. We loved each other and we had a child. That was you, Andrew." I shook my head, unwilling to believe it. "No, that's impossible. My mother, she never mentioned you. And if you were my father, why did I grow up alone? Why did my mother die in that fire and you weren't there?" Victor bowed his head, his hands clenching into fists. "Because I abandoned her," he said, his voice breaking. "I abandoned both of you." He began to tell the story, each word like a knife stabbing into my heart. Over 25 years ago, Victor Moore was a poor young man working at an auto repair shop in Richmond. He met my mother, Evelyn, a gentlewoman whose smile could brighten even the darkest days. They fell in love, got married, and she became pregnant with me. But life wasn't easy. Victor struggled to make ends meet, to build a future for his family. Then one day, a wealthy widow, the chairwoman of Waverly Holdings at the time, took an interest in him. She promised him a life he'd never dared to dream of: money, prestige, power. All he had to do was leave Evelyn and his unborn child. "I was tempted," Victor said, his voice choking. "I chose the easy path. I left your mother thinking I could build a better life and come back for you both. But I was wrong. I was too cowardly to return." He explained that he married the widow, had Noah, and after she died of a heart attack, he took over Waverly Holdings. But not a single day passed without him being haunted by his decision. When he heard about the fire on George Street, when he learned Evelyn had died, he thought it was the price he had to pay. "I didn't know you were alive," he said, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I thought I'd lost both you and Evelyn. Until I saw you on George Street by that burned house." I sat there, stunned, my mind reeling. I wanted to scream, to punch him, to blame him for every ounce of pain I'd endured. The beatings from Henry, Marla's cruel words, the judgmental stares at school and work. "You think this is enough?" I said, my voice trembling with anger. "You abandoned my mother, abandoned me for money and status, and now you stand here saying I'm your son? You think I'll forgive you?" Victor didn't respond immediately. He just looked at me, his eyes filled with pain and regret. "I don't expect your forgiveness," he said. "I just want to give you the identity you deserve and make amends for the rest of my life. I don't deserve to be your father, Andrew, but I want to make things right." I stood up, feeling the room spin around me. I wanted to run, to return to my quiet life where no one knew who I was, where I didn't have to face secrets like this. "I need time," I said, my voice hoarse. I can't deal with this right now." Victor nodded, not pressing me. "I'll wait," he said. "Whatever you decide, I'll respect it." I left the mansion, stepping out into the cold night air. I didn't look back, but I felt Victor's eyes following me, as if he feared this might be the last time he'd see me. My mind was empty yet flooded with emotions. Anger, pain, and a question with no answer. Could I ever forgive the man who destroyed my mother's life and mine? The taxi carried me through the pitch-black streets of Richmond, the streetlights blurring in my eyes, not from rain, but from the tears I was desperately trying to hold back. Victor Moore's confession still echoed in my mind, each word like a hammer striking my already scarred heart. "I am your father," he had said, and I felt the entire world I knew crumble. My mother, Evelyn, died in that fire all those years ago, and he, the man claiming to be my father, had abandoned her, abandoned me, for wealth and status. I gripped the edge of my seat, my nails digging into my palms, trying to keep myself from getting lost in the storm of emotions. Anger, pain, and a profound sense of confusion. Who was I? An adopted child, an outcast because of the scar on my face, or the son of a powerful man I had never known? My apartment loomed in the darkness, small and run down, but the only place I felt safe. I stepped inside, tossed my keys onto the table, and sank into a chair, my mind blank. The scar on my face seemed to burn beneath the mask, as if reminding me that no matter how hard I tried to escape the past, it always found a way to pull me back. I closed my eyes, trying to push away the image of Victor, his regret-filled eyes, but instead I saw my mother. Her faint face in my memories, her gentle smile, and her final scream. "Andrew, run!" I opened my eyes, my chest tightening, feeling like I was still that 4-year-old boy, cowering in a corner, waiting for someone to save me from the flames. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the stained ceiling, listening to the distant sound of car horns. I thought about my life, the years growing up under Henry and Marla's cold indifference, the judgmental stares at school, the mocking laughter at Langford Holdings. And now Victor Waverly, the man claiming to be my father, had stormed into my life like a hurricane, tearing down the walls I'd built to protect myself. I wanted to hate him, to despise him for abandoning my mother and me, but a small part of me, a part I didn't want to acknowledge, longed to understand him, to know why. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I couldn't face the curious stares, the whispers about what had happened at the gala. Instead, I texted Harper, my adoptive sister, the only light in my dark world. "Hey, I need to see you. It's important." Within minutes, she replied, "I'm coming over. You're at home, right? Don't worry, I'll bring sandwiches." I gave a faint smile, a flicker of warmth creeping into my heart, if only for a moment. Harper showed up at my door by noon, her blonde hair tied high, her smile as bright as sunshine. She hugged me tightly, and I felt the familiar warmth, the only thing that made me feel I wasn't entirely alone. "You look awful, Andrew," she said, frowning, but her eyes sparkled with concern. "What's going on? You're not okay, are you?" We sat at my small kitchen table, a plate of sandwiches she'd brought. Cold cuts, cheese, and a touch of the love she always showed me, sitting between us. I took a deep breath, and then, like a dam breaking, I told her everything. I told her about the encounter on George Street, about Victor Waverly, about his shocking declaration at the gala, and about his confession in the night, that he was my father, that he had abandoned my mother, that I was his son. Harper listened without interrupting, her eyes widening, shifting from surprise to pain, then softening with empathy. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of a napkin. "Andrew," she finally said, her voice gentle but firm, You have every right to be angry. If I were you, I'd want to punch him in the face. But you know, holding on to that hate will only hurt you more. It won't change the past and it won't bring your mom back. I bowed my head, feeling as though a boulder was pressing on my chest. But how can you understand, Harper? He destroyed my mother's life. If he hadn't abandoned her, maybe she'd still be alive. Maybe I wouldn't have grown up with Henry and Marla, enduring their beatings, their insults. Maybe I wouldn't have to live with this scar, hiding from the world. Harper took my hand, her small hand warm and comforting. You're right, Andrew. What he did was wrong, and no one can erase the pain you've been through. But do you think holding on to that pain is tying you to the past? You deserve to be happy, big brother. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting or accepting what he did. Forgiving means setting yourself free so you can live for yourself, not for those scars. Her words were like a cool breeze cutting through my chaotic mind. I looked at her, the little girl who had stood up to bullies for me as a child, the only person who ever saw me as true family. But if I forgive, I said, my voice hoarse, wouldn't that be betraying my mom? She died because of him. Harper shook her head, her eyes shining with resolve. Your mom loved you, Andrew. If she were here, she'd want you to live a meaningful life, not one filled with resentment. Forgiving isn't giving him a free pass. It's how you heal so the scar in your heart no longer holds you back. I fell silent, letting Harper's words sink in. I thought about the sleepless nights, the days I kept my head down to avoid others' stares, the times I wondered if I was worthy of love. Harper was right. I had let the past define me for too long. But forgiving Victor, the man who abandoned my mother and me, was something I wasn't sure I could do. Harper stayed with me all day. We ate sandwiches, watched an old comedy she loved, and for the first time in days I laughed. Not much, but enough to feel a moment of relief. When she left, she hugged me again, whispering, "You're stronger than you think, Andrew. Don't let anyone, not even him, take that away from you." I nodded, but my heart remained a tangled mess. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about Harper's advice. Forgiving wasn't just giving Victor a chance. It was giving myself a chance to live, to step out of the shadow of my past. But did I have the courage to do it? I closed my eyes, and this time I didn't dream of the fire or my mother's screams. I dreamed of a long road leading somewhere unknown, but for the first time I felt a tiny spark of hope flickering in the darkness. I stood before the mirror in my small apartment, staring at the scar that stretched from my left cheek down to my neck, red and jagged like an unhealed road leading me back to the past. A week had passed since my conversation with Harper, and her advice still echoed in my mind, gentle but persistent. Forgiving is about setting yourself free, Andrew. I wanted to believe her, to believe I could let go of the pain, but every time I thought of Victor Waverly, no, Victor Moore, the man who claimed to be my father, anger surged within me. He had abandoned my mother, abandoned me for fame and fortune. How could I forgive someone who let my mother die in that fire, who left me to grow up in the cold indifference of Henry and Marla, who left me with this scar, not just on my skin but in my heart? I pulled up my mask, covering half my face, as I always did to hide from the world. But today I knew I couldn't keep running. After that night at Victor's mansion, I had avoided him, ignoring his texts and calls. I needed time to process, to figure out what I truly wanted. But Harper was right. I couldn't keep fleeing. I had to face him, not because he deserved it, but because I deserved to be free from the shadow of my past. I took a deep breath, summoned all my courage, and decided to go to the headquarters of Waverly Holdings, where Victor worked, to have a clear, final conversation. The Waverly Holdings headquarters stood in the heart of Richmond, a gleaming glass building with sleek, modern lines, as if built to proclaim power. I stepped into the grand lobby, feeling like I was entering a world that didn't belong to me. The receptionist glanced at me, a flicker of surprise in her eyes when I said I wanted to see Victor Waverly. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, her voice professional but cold. I shook my head, my chest tightening. I'm Andrew, I said, my voice dry. He's expecting me. She made a call to confirm, and minutes later I was escorted to the top floor where Victor's office was. The elevator doors opened and I stepped into a wide hallway, the marble floor gleaming under the lights. Victor's secretary, a middle-aged woman with a polite smile, led me to a large wooden door. "Mr. Waverly is waiting for you," she said before leaving me standing there, my heart pounding. I knocked, and Victor's voice came through low but warm. "Come in, Andrew." I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Victor was seated behind a large desk, the light from the expansive window behind him illuminating his face, highlighting the wrinkles and the emotional depth in his eyes. When he saw me, he stood, his eyes lighting up with a mix of joy and apprehension. "Andrew," he said, his voice trembling, "I thought you wouldn't come." I didn't respond immediately, just stood there, my hands gripping the edge of my jacket. The office was vast, with abstract paintings on the walls and shelves lined with leather-bound books, making me feel smaller than ever. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't know what I'm doing here," I said. "But I need to understand. I need to know why you want me in your life now after everything that's happened." Victor stepped out from behind his desk, moving closer but stopping when he saw me take a step back. He nodded as if understanding I wasn't ready. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," he said, his voice sincere. "I just want a chance to make things right. I was wrong to abandon your mother, wrong to think money and power could fill the void in my heart. I don't deserve to be your father, Andrew, but I want to make amends, not to atone, but because you're my son and I want to know you, to be part of your life." I looked at him, searching for any hint of deceit, but his eyes, filled with pain and hope, made it impossible to doubt his sincerity. But before I could respond, the office door swung open and a sharp, cold voice cut through the air. "How touching," Noah Waverly said, stepping into the room, his eyes blazing with anger. "A family reunion story, right? Too bad it's built on a lie." I turned, my heart racing. Noah stood there in a navy suit, his hair slicked back, wearing the same mocking smile I remembered from the gala when he called me a horror movie actor in front of everyone. Anger flared within me again. "Noah," Victor said, his voice a warning, but Noah didn't stop. "Father, I've heard enough," Noah said, stepping closer, his gaze burning into me. "He's a fraud, preying on your pity to take everything. Do you really believe he's your son? A guy with a face like that?" He pointed at me, at the scar I no longer hid with a mask, and I felt my blood boil. "Noah, enough," Victor roared, his voice like thunder. He stepped forward, positioning himself between me and Noah, his eyes sharp as a blade. "You will not speak about your brother like that." "Brother?" Noah laughed, but it was a bitter, hollow sound. "You're choosing this guy over me, the one who's been by your side all these years? You're ready to hand over the company, everything, to some nobody who shows up with a sob story? I won't accept this." I stood there, silent, feeling like I was caught in a storm I didn't belong in. I wanted to leave, to return to my small apartment where no one could hurt me. But Victor didn't let me. He turned to Noah, his voice firm and commanding. "Noah, you've been spoiled for too long. I was wrong to let you grow up with such arrogance and callousness. Andrew is your brother, my son, and I won't allow you to insult him again. If you don't change, you'll lose far more than an inheritance." Noah froze, his eyes filled with anger and hurt. He glared at me, his look piercing, then turned and slammed the door behind him. The room fell silent, save for Victor's heavy breathing. He turned to me, his eyes softening but filled with regret. "I'm sorry, Andrew," he said. "I was wrong in how I raised Noah. I don't want you to think I'm forcing you into a family that doesn't welcome you." I didn't know what to say. I looked at Victor, the man trying to make amends, and felt an unexpected pang of empathy. "I don't know if I can do this," I said, my voice hoarse. "But thank you for standing up for me." Victor nodded, a faint spark of hope in his eyes. "I'll wait, Andrew," he said, "for as long as you need." I left the office, stepping out into the cold Richmond air, carrying a tangle of emotions. I wasn't sure I could forgive Victor, but for the first time I felt I was walking down a new path, one where I was no longer entirely alone. I stepped out of the Waverly Holdings headquarters, the cold Richmond air wrapping around me like an old coat. The confrontation with Noah and Victor still echoed in my mind, every word and glance etched deeply into my thoughts. Noah, with his arrogance and resentment, had called me a fraud, but Victor, the man who claimed to be my father, had stood up for me, his voice filled with authority and resolve. "Andrew is your brother," he had said. And though I still couldn't fully accept him as my father, those words had shaken something within me. Harper was right. Forgiving wasn't about forgetting. It was about allowing myself to be free. But freedom was a foreign concept to me. I had spent my life in the shadow of the past, the fire when I was 4, my mother's death, the coldness of Henry and Marla, the judgmental stares at school and work. Victor was a new piece of the puzzle, one I didn't know where to place in the shattered mosaic of my life. As I walked toward my car, my phone buzzed. A text from Victor. "Andrew, I'd like to invite you to dinner. Just the 2 of us. Friday, 7 p.m. at the restaurant by the James River. Will you come?" I stared at the screen, my fingers frozen on the keypad. Part of me wanted to refuse, to retreat to my small apartment where I could hide from the world. But Harper's words echoed again. Forgiving is about setting yourself free. I took a deep breath and typed, "I'll be there." As I hit send, my heart raced as if I had just stepped through a door without knowing where it led. Friday came faster than I expected. I stood before the mirror, adjusting my black dress shirt and tie, trying to look better than I felt. The scar on my face was still there, red and unrelenting, but this time I didn't wear a mask. Not because I was confident, but because I wanted to face Victor and myself without hiding. I drove to the small restaurant by the James River, a cozy place with warm golden lights and wooden tables overlooking the shimmering water. When I walked in, Victor was already there, seated at a table near the window, his eyes lighting up when he saw me. "Andrew," he said, standing, his voice thick with emotion, "thank you for coming." I nodded, sitting across from him, feeling like I was stepping into a play without knowing the script. Victor wore a simple suit, no longer exuding the commanding presence he had at the headquarters, but appearing more approachable, like an ordinary man carrying the weight of his past. We ordered grilled salmon for me, steak for him, and for the first few minutes neither of us spoke. The clink of cutlery against plates, the gentle lapping of waves outside, and the sound of our breathing seemed to be the only noises in the space. Finally, Victor broke the silence. "I know you're still angry with me," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "I don't blame you. But I want you to know that since meeting you on George Street, not a day has gone by that I haven't thought of you, of the mistakes I made." I set my cutlery down, trying to keep my voice steady. "You abandoned my mother," I said. "She died in that fire, and I grew up with people who didn't see me as their son. Do you know how much that hurt? Do you know what it's like to live with this scar, not just on my face, but in my heart, every single day?" Victor bowed his head, his hand tightening around his glass. "I know," he said, his voice breaking, "and I'll carry that guilt until the end of my life. But I'm here, Andrew, not to ask for forgiveness, but to show you I want to be part of your life, even just a little." I fell silent, letting his words sink in. There was something in his voice, sincerity, regret, that made it impossible to fully hate him. I thought of Harper, how she told me forgiving was about setting myself free, and for the first time I felt I wanted to try, not for Victor, but for myself. The dinner continued, and gradually the atmosphere lightened. Victor told me about his youth, how he met my mother, Evelyn, in a small Richmond cafe. "Your mother had the most beautiful smile I'd ever seen," he said, his eyes distant. "She made everything brighter, even the worst days." I listened, and though I didn't want to admit it, I felt a faint connection to my mother through his stories. I told him about Harper, how she was the only light in my darkest years, and Victor smiled, his eyes shining with gratitude. "You're lucky to have a sister like her," he said. When dessert was served, chocolate mousse I reluctantly ordered at his suggestion, Victor suddenly asked, "Andrew, have you ever thought about your dreams? Not your job, not what you do to survive, but what you truly want." The question caught me off guard. Dreams. I'd never dared to think about them. My life had been a series of survivals. Surviving the fire, Henry and Marla's coldness, the judgmental stares. But as Victor asked, a memory surfaced from deep within. Me, a little boy, sitting with my mother as she spoke of warm homes where people were loved no matter who they were. "I want to build a place like that," I said, my voice soft but certain. "A community center where orphaned kids, people who've been hurt, can feel like they belong." Victor listened, his eyes lighting up with pride and emotion. "That's a dream worth pursuing," he said, "and I want to help you make it real if you'll let me." I looked at him, my heart racing. I didn't want to rely on him, didn't want to feel indebted. But something in his voice made me believe he didn't just want to atone. He wanted to be part of my life. "I'll think about it," I said, and for the first time I saw a genuine smile on Victor's face. In the weeks that followed, Victor and I began meeting regularly, often for simple dinners like this one. He offered me many things: a key to a beachfront villa, a sports car, an unlimited credit card. But I refused to use them. I still drove my old car, still lived in my small apartment, and Victor respected my choice. "I'm not trying to buy you," he once said, and I believed him. One evening by the James River, as we sat watching the shimmering water, Victor asked again about the community center project. I shared more, feeling comfortable for the first time talking about my dream. Victor nodded, listening intently, and when I finished, he took my hand, his voice warm and steady. "I'm proud of you, Andrew," he said, "and I'll be here whenever you need me." When I got home that night, Harper called. I told her about the dinner, about the project, and she smiled through the phone. "That's the Andrew I know," she said. "Not running, not leaning on anyone, but daring to live for himself." I stood in my new office, a small but bright room on the 15th floor of Waverly Holdings, where I had just been promoted for my outstanding financial reports. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the glass window, illuminating the oak desk and neatly arranged stacks of documents. The scar on my face, red and jagged, was still there, but today I didn't wear a mask. Not because I had fully accepted it, but because I was trying, little by little, to live authentically, as Harper had urged. The dinners with Victor, the conversations about my dream of building a community center, had sparked a glimmer of hope. That I could move beyond the shadow of my past, that I could be more than the kid picked from the ashes. But I was beginning to realize that the past never truly lets go. It was like the fire from when I was 4. Though extinguished, it left burns that never healed. And today the past returned, not as memories or dreams, but as 2 flesh and blood people standing at my office door. Henry and Marla, the adoptive parents who raised me in coldness and criticism. I had just finished a brief meeting with my team and was checking emails when my secretary knocked. "Mr. Andrew, there are 2 people here to see you," she said, her voice hesitant. "They say they're your parents." I froze, my hand stiffening on the keyboard. "Parents?" A chill ran down my spine, as if I sensed an approaching storm. "Let them in," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, but my heart pounded. The door opened and Henry stepped in first, his tall frame and stern face marked by deeper wrinkles than I remembered. Marla followed, her gray hair disheveled, her eyes darting as if hiding something. They stood there in my modern office, looking out of place like ghosts from a time I had tried to bury. "Andrew," Henry said, his voice low but tinged with arrogance, "you're doing well." I didn't respond immediately, just stared at them, trying to suppress the wave of emotion surging within me. Henry and Marla, the people who called me useless, who scolded me for breaking a glass, who made me grow up in fear and loneliness. They hadn't contacted me in years, not a single call or text since I left their house at 18. And now, here they were, as if nothing had happened. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. Marla stepped forward, her hands clutching an old purse. "Andrew, we heard about you," she said, her voice faltering as she forced a smile. "About you working here, about your father, Mr. Waverly. We just wanted to visit to see how you're doing." I felt my blood boil. "Visit me?" I repeated, my voice laced with sarcasm. "After 10 years of silence? After years of calling me the kid picked from the ashes? You think I'll believe you came here just to check on me?" Henry frowned, his eyes flashing with familiar irritation. "What's that tone, Andrew? We raised you, gave you a roof when no one else wanted you. You think that was easy? We deserve better than this." I let out a laugh, but it was dry, filled with bitterness. "A roof? You gave me a cold house where I was beaten, insulted, reminded every day that I was a burden. You weren't my parents. Harper, she was the only family I ever had." Marla lowered her head, her hands trembling. "We did our best," she said weakly, as if trying to convince herself. "We weren't rich, Andrew. Raising you wasn't easy. But now you're successful, working in a place like this with a father like Victor Waverly. Don't you think you owe us something? A little help for all the years we took you in?" I was stunned, unable to believe my ears. They came here not to apologize or mend things, but to demand money, to profit from the story of me and Victor, a story now circulating in the papers as a symbol of overcoming adversity. "You think I owe you?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger. "I'm grateful for the roof, but gratitude isn't a reason for you to come here and make demands. I learned that from the way you treated me." Henry stepped forward, his face flushed. "How dare you, you ungrateful brat," he shouted. "We spent so much money raising you for 14 years. If you don't pay us back, I'll sue you. I'll make the world know you're an ungrateful wretch." At that moment, the office door swung open and Victor stepped in, his presence commanding in a black suit. My secretary stood behind him, her eyes anxious. Victor looked at Henry, then Marla, and I saw his gaze sharpen like a beast protecting its young. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice low but authoritative. Henry turned, his tone dropping but still defiant. "We're Andrew's adoptive parents. We came to talk, but he's being unreasonable." Victor stepped forward, standing beside me, and I felt the strength of his presence. "Andrew doesn't owe you anything," he said, each word firm as iron. "The boy you once called the kid picked from the ashes is now the man I'm proud to call my son. If you continue to harass him, I'll ensure the law stands on his side." Henry stepped back, his face paling, though his eyes still burned with anger. Marla stood there, her gaze wavering, tinged with regret. I looked at her, and for the first time I didn't feel anger, just a deep exhaustion. Henry pulled Marla away and they left without another word. As the door closed, Victor placed a hand on my shoulder, his eyes filled with pride. "You did well, Andrew," he said. I didn't respond, but inside I felt a sense of relief. Not because Henry and Marla were gone, but because I had stood up, no longer the frightened boy of the past. I stood on the small balcony of my apartment, gazing down at the James River shimmering under the moonlight. The cold breeze tousled my hair, but this time I didn't pull up my collar to hide the scar on my face. That scar had once been a curse, a constant reminder of the fire when I was 4, of my mother's death, of the years of loneliness and rejection. But now, after the confrontation with Henry and Marla, after dinners with Victor and Harper's wise words, I was beginning to see it differently. It was no longer a mark of destruction, but proof that I had survived. And more than that, I was learning how to truly live. The encounter with Henry and Marla the previous day still haunted me. Henry's threats, Marla's regretful eyes, and the way Victor stood up for me, it was all like a whirlwind, pulling me out of the safety of silence and forcing me to face my past. But when they left, when Victor placed his hand on my shoulder and said he was proud, I felt a relief I had never known. Not because I had defeated them, but because I had defeated the frightened boy who once cowered in a corner, terrified of others' gazes. A year had passed since that day, and my life had changed in ways I never dared to dream. The Community Center Project, the dream I shared with Victor during a dinner by the James River, was now a reality. I stood before the newly built structure, a modest but warm building with white walls and large windows that welcomed the sunlight. Inside were rooms for orphaned children, for those who had been hurt, for anyone who needed a place to feel they belonged. I named it Evelyn House in honor of my mother, the woman who sacrificed everything to save me from the fire. Victor kept his promise. He supported me not by taking control, but as a mentor. He connected me with donors, advised on finances, but left me in charge. "This is your dream, Andrew," he once said, his eyes shining with pride. "I just want to help make it real." I felt the sincerity in his words, and though I still hadn't called him Dad, I no longer felt anger when I looked at him. Noah, my brother, a concept still foreign to me, left Richmond after the confrontation in Victor's office. I heard he started over in another city, working for a smaller company far from the spotlight of Waverly Holdings. One day, Victor received a letter from Noah, brief but emotional. He apologized, not just for what he said about me, but for the way he had lived. Arrogant, callous, as if the world owed him everything. Victor read the letter to me during a dinner, and I saw tears glisten in his eyes. "Maybe one day you two will talk again," he said, and I nodded, not promising anything but hoping time would heal. Harper, the unwavering light in my life, was now a nurse at a community health center. She visited often, sometimes with homemade cookies, sometimes just to sit and talk. "I'm so proud of you, Andrew," she said during her first visit to Evelyn House. "This is a place your mom would have loved." I smiled, warmed by her words, knowing she was right. Evelyn House wasn't just a building. It was my way of giving back to the world, of turning my scars into something meaningful. Today was the opening ceremony for Evelyn House. I stood before a crowd, donors, staff, and the children who would call this place home. I wore no mask, didn't bow my head. My scar was exposed, and for the first time I didn't feel the need to hide. Victor stood in the front row, his eyes gleaming with pride. Harper was beside me, holding my hand, her smile radiant. When invited to speak, I stepped onto the podium, my heart pounding, not from fear, but because I knew I was doing something right. "My name is Andrew," I began, my voice clear in the air. "I grew up with a scar, not just on my face but in my heart. I once thought I didn't belong anywhere, that my life was just a series of survivals. But I've learned that while we can't choose where we come from, we can choose how to live. Evelyn House isn't about me. It's about all of us, about forgiveness, resilience, and how we can turn pain into hope." The crowd applauded, and I looked down to see Victor nodding, his eyes misty. Harper squeezed my hand, whispering, "You did it, big brother." As the ceremony ended, Victor approached, clasping my hand tightly, saying nothing, but his eyes said everything. For the first time, I felt a connection with him, not as father and son, but as two people carrying scars, both trying to heal. That night, I returned to my apartment, sitting on the balcony, watching the James River sparkle. I thought of my mother, of Harper, of Victor, and of myself. I thought of the years I spent running, bowing my head to avoid others' stares. But now, I wasn't running anymore. The scar on my face remained, but it no longer defined me. Forgiveness, I realized, didn't change the past, but it made the future meaningful. I closed my eyes, letting the night breeze wash over me, and for the first time in my life, I felt at peace. I was no longer the kid picked from the ashes. I was Andrew, and I had found light beyond the scar.